News of the Times. The baffling case of Margaret Ball, found hanging. But did he kill her? Welcome to News of the Times. A woman found hanging, a confession made, but was it murder or something stranger? In this baffling 1874 case from Hackney Wick, a young man runs to a neighbour and calmly announces, "I've murdered Maggie." Moments later, Margaret Ball is found hanging from the stair bannisters, but in a position that makes the scene look less like murder and more like a mystery. George Coulson, a small, dishevelled shoeblack, is quickly arrested after pawning the woman's earrings. He confesses more than once. But is his story true? Or is it something else going on entirely? Was this a brutal, motiveless killing, a tragic act of desperation, or could it even have been suicide, misread and misremembered? The court would have to decide, and their verdict would surprise many. And in today's end of episode further particulars segment, we turn from the courts of Hackney to the curiosities of the Royal Aquarium, where Victorian Londoners gathered to see a most unusual guest, Mr. Russell McCoy, a direct descendant from the infamous Bounty mutineers. A native of Pitcairn Island, Mr. McCoy captivated audiences with tales of maritime rebellion, remote island life, and a legacy born of one of history's most dramatic sea mutinies. Before we dive headlong into the ropes, rumours and remarkable contradictions of today's case, a small plea to outwit the almighty YouTube algorithm. If you enjoy historical crime served with a dash of intrigue and a healthy suspicion of confessions, do please like, subscribe, and if you're feeling particularly generous, share us with somebody who enjoys a baffling case over breakfast. It helps more than you know. Now, what did happen in Hackney Wick? A woman found hanging, a young man confessing, but the clues not quite as they seem. Settle back and judge for yourself. Background. Margaret Ball was, by all contemporary accounts, a strong, healthy woman in the prime of her life, just 27 years old and heavily pregnant with her third child. She lived in modest circumstances with her husband, John, a skin dresser, and their two young children at 13 Homer Road, Hackney Wick. Though her financial situation appears to have been precarious, the couple, sharing their small home with lodgers, including a shoeblack named George Coulson, Margaret remained a steady presence in her family's life. On the morning of her death, she walked to her husband's workplace to ask for money to buy food for the children. She was in good spirits when last seen alive by neighbours. Margaret was no frail figure. Multiple witnesses, including the doctor called to examining her body, described her as physically powerful, far stronger than the diminutive young man accused of killing her. George Coulson was a 21-year-old shoeblack from Hackney Wick, described in contemporary accounts as small, dirty in appearance, and somewhat strange. Many in the neighbourhood believed him to be weak-minded, the kind of young man more likely to be pitied than feared. One report even referred to him as half-witted, and his behaviour throughout the proceedings seemed to confirm a general lack of mental strength or clarity. He lived with his mother and siblings at 13 Homer Road, in the same cramped lodging house as Margaret Ball, her husband, and their two young children. Although not related by blood, Coulson had long referred to Margaret affectionately as aunt, a term encouraged by the adults in the home, despite no actual family ties. By all accounts, George and Margaret had been on good terms, and there was no evidence of animosity between them, no reported quarrels, and no threat. It was a case that sent ripples through the quiet streets of Hackney Wick. By the afternoon of May the 6th, 1874, word had spread. A woman had been found hanged inside a modest terraced home. Her young lodger fled, and the neighbours were left stunned. The earliest reports were confused, contradictory, and quick to assign guilt. But one thing was certain: a woman was dead, and the circumstances were deeply troubling. From the London Evening Standard on the 7th of May, 1874, Murder at Hackney Wick. The tranquillity of Hackney Wick and South Hackney has been sadly disturbed yesterday afternoon by the report that a dreadful tragedy had been enacted at Homer Road, which is a short thoroughfare of small houses leading from Grove Street Road to Park Street, Hackney Wick. On proceeding to the spot, it was found that at number 13, a young man named George Coulson, aged 21, had murdered his aunt, Margaret Ball, by hanging her with a rope over the bannisters. The murderer, who is said to be half-witted and was in the habit of earning money by cleaning boots under the North London Railway arch at Hackney Wick on Sunday mornings, was out with the murdered woman in the morning, and they were seen to enter the home where they lived shortly before 3 o'clock. A short time afterwards, Coulson came out and ran across the road to a neighbour, Mrs. Lane, who lived at number 31, and said, "Will you tell my mother she'll never see me again? I've hung Margaret. If you don't believe me, come over and look." Mrs. Lane went over with him, and when he opened the door, she saw the poor woman apparently sitting on the stairs with a rope around her neck, which was stretched over the banister. Feeling alarmed, Mrs. Lane ran off into the house of a neighbour. The murderer closed the door, but shortly afterwards he came out again, ran over to number 31, and finding no one there, he ran off as hard as he could, and does not appear to have been heard of since. Whether anyone but Mrs. Lane then knew of the transaction, we can't say, but no efforts appear to have been made to capture him. The unfortunate woman was married to a furrier who is employed by a firm at Finebury. She leaves 2 young children, the eldest of whom is only about 4 years of age, and was expected to be confined again in about a month. By the following morning, the manhunt had ended. George Coulson, dishevelled and evasive, was found lying on a park bench in Victoria Park, seemingly unfazed by the grim events of the day before. He was quickly taken into custody and brought before the Worship Street Police Court to face charges of wilful murder. The earlier court reports painted a curious picture of a young man, detached, indifferent, and rumoured to be related to the victim, though even that detail would soon be corrected. From the Echo in London, the 7th of May, 1874, the murder at Hackney, apprehension, examination of the accused. At Worship Street Police Court this afternoon, just after 1 o'clock, George Coulson, 22 years of age, described as a shoeblack, residing at 13 Homer Road, Hackney Wick, was brought up in custody of Chief Inspector Waterfield, N Division, charged with the wilful murder of Margaret Ball, about 25 years of age, by hanging her. Mr. Superintendent Green of N Division conducted the case on behalf of the police. The prisoner was not defended. When placed in the dock, the prisoner, who is an undersized youth of very dirty and somewhat strange appearance, gave his name to the jailer in a careless manner, and then putting his hands in his pockets, lolled on the rail by the dock, apparently indifferent to the whole of the proceedings. It has been stated that the murdered woman stood in the relation of aunt to the prisoner, but this is not the case. She was simply a lodger in the same house with the father and mother of the prisoner, but the children had been taught to call her aunt, and hence perhaps the error. The prisoner absconded immediately after having given the alarm to a neighbour that he had murdered Margaret, but under the direction of Superintendent Green, detective officers were ordered out to search for him, and at an early hour this morning, Detectives Chapman and Hoyes discovered him lying on a seat in the enclosures of Victoria Park and took him into custody. Thomas Harris, Police Constable 390N, deposed yesterday, Wednesday afternoon, at about 4 o'clock. I was on duty in Hackney Wick, and I received information that some man had hung a woman at 13 Homer Road, Hackney Wick. I went there, and in the passage saw a woman hanging by a rope from the banister over the staircase. Her knees were slightly bent, and her toes were touching, but very slightly, the flooring. But she was dead. I cut her down and sent for a doctor and other assistance. The body was then warm. As the courtroom filled, the case against George Coulson began to unfold, not through forensic evidence, but through the voices of those who knew him and who had witnessed the strange and tragic aftermath of Margaret Ball's death. From a neighbour with a baby on her hip to a flower hawker with an eye for pawn tickets, the accounts painted a picture of confusion, alarm, and a series of statements that seemed to swing between confession and collapse. Martha Lane. I am married and live at 31 Homer Road. I knew the woman, Margaret Ball. I met her about 9 o'clock in the morning. She said she was going to her husband's firm. I saw her again 20 minutes to 3 o'clock, and she said she had been. George Coulson, the prisoner, was with her. I then went home, and about 5 minutes to 3, the prisoner came to my house and said, "Excuse me coming in, Mrs. Lane. I want you to give a message to my mother. Tell her she won't see me any more in London, for I've murdered Moggy. If you don't believe me, come and see." I took up my baby and went across the house to number 13. He pushed open the door and said, "There she is. Now, will you believe me?" I saw her then hanging from the banisters with a rope around her neck. I left him in the house and went away. I saw him come out and go up Homer Road 2 or 3 minutes after I saw him come back, and he opened the door of my house and went in. I wasn't there, but was on the other side talking to a neighbour. He went out of my house and went away towards Castland Road. She was in a sitting position on the bottom with her knees bent. John Lawrence, living in Wick Road, Hackney, deposed, I am a hawker of flowers. I know the prisoner from meeting him in shoe blacking. I met him about 3:15 yesterday afternoon in Castland Road. He said, "Hello, Bill, where are you going?" He came up and touched me on the shoulders and said, "I'm going away, Jack. I've been and done a murder. I've murdered my aunt, and if you don't believe me, go home and burst the door open and you'll see her hanging. I've been and pawned her earrings. Here's the money, 1 shilling 5 and a halfpenny the ticket, that is 6. He tore up the ticket and threw it down on the ground. I saw that it was a pawn ticket, and he picked up a bit and showed me a number 13 on it. Then he threw it away again. Inspector Waterfield here produced portions of a pawn ticket fitted together and pasted on paper. The ticket referred to a pair of earrings pawned for 18p in the name of George Coulson, 13 Homer Road. The witness continued and said, Then he left me and said he was going to see some of his friends. I didn't see him again till this morning at the station. John Ball deposed, I am a skin dresser. The deceased was my wife and I live at 13 Homer Road. She came to me about 11 in the morning and asked me for money. I gave it her and said that she could go home and get the children some dinner. No, sir, she had come over to see where I was, as I had not been home the day before. There had been no quarrel with her. I know the prisoner. He lived in the same house. He was no relation. I know the earrings produced. My wife had them in when she came down to me yesterday. I do not know of any quarrel with my wife by the prisoner. That's all I have to say. As the courtroom heard the witness testimony, behind the scenes detectives were already hard at work. George Coulson had vanished after alerting neighbours to Margaret's death, but not without leaving a trail. A pawn ticket torn and discarded in the moment of panic led investigators on a quiet search across Hackney and beyond, and it was in the early hours of the following morning on a park bench in Victoria Park that the final pieces began to fall in place. What happened next would reveal not only where Coulson had fled, but perhaps a glimpse into what he truly believed he had done. Evidence having been given as to the pawning of the earrings by the prisoner and the finding of the portions of the pawn ticket produced, Detective Chapman said, at about 4:45 yesterday afternoon, I received information of a woman having been found hanging in Homer Road. I made inquiries and received a description of the prisoner whom I knew. I went in search of him, accompanied by Detective Crisp and Hayes. At about 7:15 in the morning, I passed through Victoria Park. My attention was drawn to a man lying on one of the seats, and I went and sat down by him. It was the prisoner, and he was asleep at the time. I woke him up and asked him if he knew me, and he said yes. I then told him I should take him into custody for murdering a woman on the previous afternoon at 13 Homer Road. He said, all right, we had a struggle and I settled her, or she would me. He said that he would go quietly, the same as he had last time. The charge was read to him at the station, but he only said, what have I to say? I'll say before the magistrate. In the passage of the court, he said, shall I plead guilty? I said I didn't know what he had better do. He said, I don't care what they do to me if they settle it today. Charles Aveling, MD, said, I was called last night to see the deceased. There were marks of the cord and other symptoms of strangulation, but no other marks as of a struggle to put the rope around her neck. There was, however, no mark at the back of the neck as if she had hanged herself. There were no scratches or abrasions of the hands or marks of a struggle. Physically, she was much more powerfully developed than the prisoner, and I should say that she could have overcome him. After hearing the evidence of Inspector Waterfield, Mr. Bushby fully committed the prisoner to Newgate for trial at the Central Criminal Court. With Coulson now in custody and the initial facts laid before the court, one might think the case was all but concluded, but public opinion and professional doubt was only beginning to stir. The following day's coverage in the Echo struck a more meditative note, questioning both the scene and the confession. Was this truly a straightforward case of murder? Or had Hackney Wick witnessed something more ambiguous and far more unsettling? From the Echo, London, on the 8th of May, 1874, a curious and sad affair is the Hackney Wick tragedy. George Coulson calls on a neighbour and coolly says to her, I've murdered Maggie, Margaret Ball, and I'm going away. If you don't believe me, come and see. And there, in truth, when they entered number 13 Homer Road, they saw the woman, Mrs. Ball, hanging by a thin cord from the balustrade, her legs bent up, her toes almost touching the floor, and life quite extinct. Coulson told him that he had murdered his aunt and had pawned her earrings for 1 shilling and 6. He was arrested while he was quietly sleeping on a bench in Victoria Park, and his sole observations on being taken into custody was, all right, we had a struggle and I settled her. The doctor who examined the body stated that the woman was much more powerful of the two, and there were no marks of struggle or of violence. He hinted at suicide. The inspector who examined the body could see no traces of a struggle, and other witnesses appeared to think that if the woman's legs had not been bent, she would have touched the ground. All criminal lawyers tell one that self-accusation is not satisfactory proof of guilt. The Hackney Wick tragedy is likely to prove a great puzzle. With questions mounting and public uncertainty growing, the case advanced to trial just over a month later, and the proceedings only deepened the mystery. Held at the Central Criminal Court, the trial of George Coulson drew attention not only for the tragic loss of Margaret Ball, but also for the sheer number of unanswered questions. Why had there been no struggle? Why would a frail young man attack a heavily pregnant woman with whom he had no quarrel? And what were jurors to make of the strange confessions Coulson had made, or of the haunting position in which the victim was found? The court was now tasked with deciding. Was this a senseless murder, a tragic suicide, or something else entirely? From the Echo in London, 11th of June 1874, the extraordinary murder at Hackney. Henry George Coulson, 23, a shoeblack, was charged upon an indictment and also by a coroner's inquisition with the wilful murder of Margaret Ball. The facts in the case were in a very narrow compass. The prisoner, it appeared, got his living as a shoeblack, and he lived with his mother and several brothers and sisters in a small house in the Homer Road in South Hackney, and the deceased, who was a strong, healthy woman of 27 years old, and who at the same time she met her death was in a far advanced stage of pregnancy, lived with her husband and 2 children in the same house. It appeared from the evidence that they were on the most friendly terms, and that the prisoner was in the habit of calling the deceased aunt, there being in fact no relationship whatever between them. The fatal occurrence took place on the 6th of May, and it appeared that the deceased had parted from her husband in good health and spirits shortly before, and she and the prisoner were seen going towards their home, apparently on good terms, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon of that day. Very soon afterwards, the prisoner went to Mrs. Lane, a woman who resided nearly opposite his own house, and he told her that he had to come to bid her good-bye, and asked her to tell his mother that she would not be seeing him again in London, and he added, I've done a murder. I have hung Maggie. Mrs. Lane in reply said, Go along, I don't believe you. And the prisoner responded to this, Well, if you don't believe me, come over and see. And he went across the road to his mother's house and pushed open the door. The witness Lane followed him, and the moment the door was opened, she saw the deceased apparently sitting upon the bottom stair, with the rope around her neck. An alarm was given and the police were called in, and the deceased was cut down, but although the body was still warm, she was quite dead. The prisoner left after this had taken place, and he met a man he knew and made a similar statement to him to that he had previously made, and at the same time produced the duplicate of a pair of earrings which he said he had taken from the deceased and had pawned for 18 pence, and he tore up the duplicate. Nothing more was seen of the prisoner until the following morning, when he was found on a bench in the Victoria Park, fast asleep. There didn't appear to be the slightest motive suggesting for the commission of the act by the prisoner, except that he intended to steal her earrings, and it appeared that the prisoner and the deceased had always been on the most friendly of terms, and there was not the least appearance of a struggle having taken place. It is also a remarkable fact that the prisoner is a small, diminutive person, and the deceased was a powerful young woman, much more than a match in physical power for the prisoner. It also appeared that she was in a most extraordinary position when found, and that if she had stood up, the rope would have been perfectly loose, and she would not have sustained any injury from its being placed around her neck, so that appeared to be some indication that the case was one of suicide rather than of murder, and but for the statements made by the prisoner himself as to having committed the murder, this would probably have been the conclusion that would have been arrived at. The witnesses who were called for the prosecution proved the facts as above given, and it appeared that when the prisoner was taken into custody, he said that it was true and that he had killed the deceased, and he added that they had had a struggle and he settled her, and if he had not done it, she would have settled him. When he was taken to the police court, he asked the constable whether he had not better plead guilty, and when he replied that he could not give him any advice, he said he did not care what they did to him, so that it was settled at once. Despite Coulson's repeated admissions, no motive emerged, no injuries, no fight, just a rope, a confession, and a haunting silence of doubt. At trial, the evidence was oddly hollow. Margaret, a strong, healthy woman, showed no signs of a struggle. The rope, thin and loosely tied, could not have suspended her weight if she had stood up. A surgeon confirmed that there was nothing in the body's appearance to rule out suicide. Mr. Aveling, one of the surgeons who had examined for the prosecution, stated in answer to the questions put by Mr. Montague Williams that there was nothing in the appearances presented by the body or the position in which the deceased was found that was inconsistent with the suggestion that the case was one of suicide. The defence set up for the prisoner was that the deceased had destroyed herself, and it was urged upon the jury as almost an impossibility that a boy like the prisoner could have destroyed the life of a young and powerful woman, such as the deceased was represented to be. The jury retired at 3:45 to deliberate upon their verdict. They returned into court in a very few minutes and found the prisoner not guilty. And just like that, a case that began with a confession and a hanging ended not just with justice, but with uncertainty, a verdict that puzzled as much as it resolved. Was George Coulson a confused young man convinced of a guilt in a moment of panic, or had he indeed taken a life, one so physically powerful it seemed almost impossible he could overpower her? We may never know what truly happened on that staircase at number 13 Homer Street. But what remains is this: a woman lost, a man freed, and a case that still whispers its puzzles into the past. Further particulars. While the court in Hackney deliberated over a modern mystery cloaked in doubt, the Illustrated Police News offered readers a glimpse of something altogether different, yet equally extraordinary. Across the pages of the 21st of May 1881 issue, Victorian Londoners were captivated by the unsuspected appearance of a man from one of the most storied episodes in naval history, the mutiny on the Bounty. A direct descendant of one of the infamous mutineers had arrived, not in chains, but on stage. And where else would you find such a man but at the Royal Aquarium? Let us turn now to this curious visitor from Pitcairn Island. From the Illustrated Police News, the 21st of May, 1881, the mutiny on the Bounty, a Pitcairn Islander at the Royal Aquarium. The reader will find on top of the front page of this week's paper a correct portrait of Mr. Russell McCoy, a lineal descendant of one of the mutineers of the Bounty. This gentleman, who hails from Pitcairn Island, where he was born and has passed the greater portion of his life, speaks most excellent English, and his explanatory remarks when addressing himself to his audience appeared to be fully appreciated by the visitors to the Royal Aquarium. Mr. McCoy was at that popular establishment during the whole of last week. He has, however, now left, and our regret is that his visit should have been of such short duration. The Bounty mutiny took place on board the Bounty, an armed ship which quitted Otaheite with breadfruit trees on the 7th of April, 1789. The mutineers put Captain Blythe and 19 men in an open boat near Andamuka, one of the Friendly Islands, on the 28th of April, 1789. They reached the island of Timor, south of the Moluccas, in June, after a voyage of nearly 4,000 miles. When the mutiny broke out, Christian, the mate, with 3 men, came to Blythe's cabin, where he slept, and seized him, tied his hands behind his back, and commanded him to observe perfect silence on pain of instant death. Nevertheless, he called for assistance, but the mutineers had previously placed in confinement all the officers who were not of their party. Christian had a drawn cutlass, his companions muskets and bayonets. Bligh was forced on deck, preceded by Christian and followed by 2 seamen with pieces cocked and fitted with bayonets. This incident forms one of the subjects in the top block. Some of the mutineers were tried on the 15th September 1792, 6 were condemned and 3 executed. The rest of the mutineers, 10 in number, betook themselves to a small island in the Pacific Ocean, said to have been discovered by Pitcairn in 1768 and seen by Cook in 1773. The place is remarkable from the fact that it has been colonized by a portion of the crew of the Bounty. The only habitations on the island are log huts, a faithful representation of which will be found in our illustrations. That concludes this episode of the Baffling Case of Margaret Ball. We so hope you enjoyed the show. If you didn't enjoy the show, please forward all complaints and suggestions and detailed architectural plans for the Tower of Babel to the Office of Irreversible Mishaps and Accidental Executions, 3rd floor, Pudding Lane Annex, Hackney Division. Open Tuesdays, occasionally. If you did enjoy the show, however, do please like, subscribe and share us with the sort of person who enjoys pondering stair ropes, pawn tickets and the legal value of a nap on a park bench. And if you'd like even more, we invite you to join us on Patreon, where you'll find over 600 full-length historical crime documentaries, along with a generous helping of nighttime readings, Poe, Dickens and others, plus occasional stabs at Victorian-style humour that might not hold up in court. You'll find the link in the description below. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, bureaucratic delay consultant, helping slow things down in an already slow office. Until next time, avoid darkened, foggy cobblestone alleyways unless you must.